Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill 2021, first reading.
The Honourable Brian Walker.
I move that the bill be now read a second time. It came as some surprise to me that the Misuse of Drugs Act 1981 had been in force for so long without a major rewrite. Indeed, such is needed. But it is manifestly clear that doing so would take an inordinate amount of time. And while there are many areas in need of attention, it is imperative that we in this chamber, as the ones entrusted with the review of legislation, take action now to correct a clear cause of injustice. I was therefore gratified, delighted, to see that the preeminent legal mind that is the Honourable Wayne Martin had recently undertaken a review of the Criminal Property Confiscation Act 2000, tabled last year in the other place, and that over some 105 pages there are more than 60 recommendations that require consideration and action. While we can recommend that serious review, it is clear that the current situation in our state, especially the COVID-19 pandemic, and the multitude of issues that arise therefrom, will likely preclude any attempt to deal with this in a timely manner. Indeed, I am happy to concede that what the Attorney-General has before him in terms of the whole of our confiscation regime is a Herculean task. I don't expect him to address it quickly if he is able to address it at all in the term of this Parliament. What I do expect, however, and what I would hope that every member of this place would expect, is that we make a start and that we right injustices where we reasonably can. Bearing in mind the Pareto principle, where the most effects can be achieved with the least input, there is one specific recommendation that can be implemented with a minimum of fuss and a maximum of benefit. I am referring to recommendation 9 of the Martin Review, which recommends that, and I quote, "The courts be given the discretion to decline to declare a person to be a drug trafficker if satisfied upon the balance of probabilities that the person has not engaged in trafficking." Let us look at what this means in practice. Currently, it is the case that police can use Schedule 7 or Schedule 8 in assessing whether a cannabis grower is to be accused of drug trafficking. Schedule 7 refers to a weight of 3 kilograms, and Schedule 8 refers to 20 plants. The choice of schedule remains with the police, and anything over those limits may be deemed a trafficable quantity. In practice, it appears that anything over those limits will be deemed a trafficable offence. While in principle we might agree with that definition, and I can assure you that we recommend this be examined in full detail at another time to come to another conclusion, it is also the case that currently it is the practice of the police force to measure the weight of the plants as they come from the ground. I am aware of cases in the recent past where that weight has been deemed to include roots, stems, and also the soil around the roots, including the water in the soil. The effective portion of those plants, the usable portion, is the flower. This is harvested, dried, and prepared for use. This is what is used by the individual for managing anxiety, depression, chronic pain, Parkinson's disease, or whatever ailment is currently making life intolerable. This is also the portion collected and sold by drug traffickers. The wet soil around the roots themselves and the stems and the leaves are not considered as usable. At present, that individual, if he or she is found to have crossed that arbitrary threshold based upon weight or upon the number of plants, and we have seen on numerous occasions that tiny seedlings are considered just as dangerous as mature, full-grown specimens, is de facto a trafficker, even if there is no evidence that they were sharing their drugs with others, let alone that they intended to make a profit from them. Surely members will agree with me that such a person should not be classified as a drug trafficker and have his or her assets confiscated unless they have actually been shown to be trafficking. It is plain common sense, but unfortunately that is not currently the law in Western Australia. This amendment addresses that clear injustice. There are many more such issues that need to be amended within the current Act, but this is but one such instance. I hope the members will plainly see the injustice that exists. Indeed, this particular amendment should offend no one, as it simply addresses the fundamental rights of a court to assess and address the issues before it. Currently, if the DPP insists on asking for a drug trafficker declaration, then the court has no option but to hand down such a declaration, regardless of the circumstances. Members need to be clear that there is currently no judicial discretion where a drug trafficker declaration is concerned. Rather, the court is obliged by a law passed in a previous Parliament to do so, even if it is plain to the judge that no trafficking has taken place. Indeed, there have been cases in recent years in which a judge has commented that there were absolutely zero commerciality, no profit was being made, no money changing hands, and yet a drug trafficker declaration was forced through. In other words, it is incumbent on the judge under current legislation to treat many defendants with what amounts to manifest injustice. If members wish to inform themselves on the prevalence of these types of cases in our courts, they could do worse than begin with Patton and another versus the State of Western Australia before District Court Judge McCann in 2013. That was the case which led Judge McCann to say, quite openly in court, that he was being asked to make an unjust finding and that there was no justice in our current system with regards to confiscation. Beyond that, I would encourage members to read the many scholarly public articles and submissions by legal experts such as Malcolm McCusker QC and Tom Percy QC. Both men are experts in their field and both are highly respected legal minds to boot. Both tell us, as Wayne Martin does, that injustices are happening on a regular basis, and this is what we need to amend. We need to return to the courts the fundamental right, indeed the obligation, to assess the matters before it and mete out a measure of justice. Our judges and lawyers recommend this. That is clear from both the submissions to and the conclusions of the Martin Review. And I do believe all here in this House will concur with the shared and congruent opinion of the legal fraternity. Let me reinforce for the benefit of clarity. The amendment we seek has been recommended by eminent legal minds. It is supported by the legal fraternity in our state. It is not in any way radical or revolutionary. It is about the return to the court of the duty to make an informed and educated opinion based on the matters before it and to judge accordingly. Members, if an individual is found to have broken the law, then they should expect a punishment. We might argue passionately for a change to the law in that regard, as I and my colleague do in relation to cannabis in general. But the principle holds. The state should, however, do everything in its power to avoid injustice. The bill before you, the Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill 2021, would put a stop to that practice, and it would do so by way of one simple, concise amendment, inserting a subsection which would allow a judge to decline to issue a drug trafficker declaration when satisfied that doing so would clearly be unjust. I understand, as I have already said, that the Attorney-General has a Herculean task on his hands if he is to recast the whole of our confiscation law, as Mr Martin has suggested he should, and as I hope he will. I have no desire to stand here and allow perfect to be the enemy of good. And I hope that the members around this chamber will take a similar approach. The bill before you only addresses one of Mr Martin's recommendations, and it does so without impact upon any other area of confiscation law. It is a standalone provision, and one which would, with a few simple words, reintroduce a sense of fairness and equity to a much maligned portion of our criminal code. Members need only refer to a list of contributors of Mr Martin's review to see how widely this simple change is sought. Our judges want it. The legal profession wants it. Our civil liberties groups want it. Even the DPP and WA Police seem to accept that the system as it stands is flawed and overdue for change. I also suspect if he had free rein and all the time and resources he could ask for, the Attorney-General would also want it. We do not live in a perfect world, however. So let us start where we can and make incremental improvements which will make a positive impact. Let us return discretion to our judges. Let us trust them to do what is right, and let us send a message that justice, true justice, does not deal in the arbitrary or the manifestly unfair. President, pursuant to Standing Order 126.1, I advise this bill is not a uniform legislation bill. It does not ratify or give effect to an intergovernmental or multilateral agreement to which the government of the state is a party, nor does this bill, by reason of the subject matter, introduce a uniform scheme or uniform laws throughout the Commonwealth. I commend the bill to the House and I table the explanatory memorandum.
the Legalise Cannabis WA party, of which I'm a member, is more inclined to the second part of this motion than we necessarily are to the first. It's right there in our name for all to see. We don't shy away from that in any way. We are proud of our position indeed. Nonetheless, it is important to find an opening position, a compromise if necessary, that all or most members here might be able to agree on. What better position that one introduced by a previous Labor government and supported by WA Labor State Conference after State Conference after State Conference. You get the idea, down through the years to this very day. The Cannabis Control Act 2003 allowed that an individual could possess up to 30 grams of cannabis without the matter going to court and could cultivate 2 plants for personal use. I lay out those provisions for new members. They will not be news to longer serving members. There are, I think, only 2, perhaps 3 members now serving who were in Parliament for the original debate in 2003, and I hope those here in the chamber will contribute to our debate today. I did check back in Hansard and noted that both the Honourable Sue Ellery and the Honourable Kate Doust were present, and both voted in favour of what was then the Cannabis Control Bill. I especially look forward to their contributions today as a result. And while I was foraging through Hansard, I checked the records for the other place, as you do when you've exhausted the sensible debate here. Interestingly, the Premier, the most popular man in WA, was a serving member when these provisions were originally introduced. I haven't been able to track down direct contribution from him in the papers I've read, but he certainly seems to have voted in favour of every clause and then voted in favour of the bill itself. His name appears in each vote next to or close to that of Mrs. A.J. McTiernan, whom would be the Honourable Alana McTiernan here, then relegated to serving elsewhere. If I'm correct, then I will be interested to hear her comments in due course as well. So,
You are correct.
I am correct. Thank you for confirming that.
I certainly voted in that way.
Cool. If those members I have named backed 30 grams and 2 plants as being effectively unworthy of legal consequence in 2003, what has changed between then and 2021? If they could effectively decriminalise cannabis for small-scale personal use in 2003, why aren't they willing to do so in 2021? Of course, I get ahead of myself. Maybe they will turn around and tell me they still believe that should be the case. I will leave that up for them to make clear during their own contributions. For my part, I want to be clear and consistent from start to finish, something I'm not convinced the government has necessarily been on this issue or will be going forward, but I hope to be proved wrong. I'm perhaps less hopeful that colleagues among the Nationals and Liberals will see eye to eye with us on this occasion, but I acknowledge consistency in their previous argument and look forward to their comments today as well. Legalise Cannabis WA does what it says on the tin. We are about the ultimate legalisation of cannabis across WA. We acknowledge that we have a road ahead of us and that we need to bring the people of Western Australia and members of this House along with us on that journey. We've taken the first steps, I think, in recent days. The second part of the motion before us speaks to our longer-term objective, which is full legalisation. We invite members to support a full and frank discussion, a detailed government-led investigation into the potential benefits of cannabis legalisation. Such an investigation could, and we hope would, be far-reaching. It could look at the economic benefits of further deregulation in the hemp industry. It could examine the impacts of removing cannabis from our judicial sphere and dealing with any health impacts as a health and well-being concern centred upon medicine and wellness. It could look at the many economic factors that encourage growth in in pro-cannabis states across the US or in Canada and figure how WA might benefit from similar or dissimilar models. It could, in a nutshell, be a major stepping stone to our understanding of what cannabis can potentially do for and on behalf of our entire community. We favour that approach. Today is about you telling us why you don't. As for the interim return to the 2003 laws we are proposing today, we believe it would be advantageous in the short term to ease the penalties and restrictions around cannabis from the get-go. Parliament did it before. This Parliament, if members are brave enough, can certainly do it again. If you won't, please let us know why. And if you won't, please let the people know why too. We invite your contributions and look forward to hearing from each and every party represented here today. In doing so, we invite you to join us on a journey. If you decline that invitation, it will surely be polite of you to tell us why. Thank you.
The Honourable Brian Walker.
Surprise and surprise. We're talking here about a drug. And I can sense from the silence across the chamber that this is something we should not be discussing because it's an illicit drug which harms people. And quite properly, I'm going to stay quiet, although I don't doubt that half of the members opposite have tried it in their own lives, perhaps on this side as well. What we are talking about here, from a medical perspective, is that of wellness, physical, mental, social and financial wellness. Can cannabis contribute in any of those 4 areas? And to all 4 areas it can contribute. Restricting cannabis as a healthy, healing herb in any way is actually contradictory to wellness. And any limitations we put on it is going to be contradictory to wellness of the general population. Let me explain that. We have permitted in our society alcohol, which kills 6,000 people a year in our country, and this is intolerable, and yet we tolerate the sale. I'm not suggesting for one moment that we restrict alcohol to the general sale. We do, however, make sure it does not go to inappropriate places, like, for example, in 14-year-old, 12-year-olds elsewhere in our nation, as currently happens, to the destruction of societies and destruction of people's health, wellness, mental, physical, social and financial. How can cannabis be of help? It can be of help in a number of ways. Most people who use cannabis now are self-treating themselves, but when we allow them to self-treat themselves with cannabis to some good effect, we automatically, in our current legislation, turn them into criminals. We have criminalised self-medicating for your own personal wellness rather than medicalising it. We need to look at this very carefully. Are we sure we want to turn a sizable proportion of our community into criminals when they are trying to heal themselves? A question we must seriously ask. Are we doing the right thing? Because if we are not, then heaven help us, we must change this. It's our obligation, it's our duty to change this. What about the physical health? Those who come back from work exhausted, working in their second job to make their payments for whatever reason. We're all knowing people, perhaps even ourselves, who have been in this situation, and we arrive back home at night exhausted, shattered in mind and body. And what would we normally do? We'll maybe have a whiskey. I can recommend some good whiskies, or a few beers, settle ourselves down. Maybe someone will have a cigarette. I can heartily recommend you do not do that. Why not take, for example, some sublingual cannabis, including some THC, which has none of the side effects of the previously mentioned commonly used drugs? Would that be of benefit and settle you for the night so you can rest that night and return to the fray the following day, unimpeded in body or in mind? I would suggest we ought to consider that strongly, because the people of our state need this. What about the social effects? We have all seen the social effects of alcohol in excess. Northbridge in Perth is a fine example of what happens. You do not see this with cannabis consumption. The social impact on our society by using cannabis properly is going to result in an enhanced wellness socially. Our night out in Northbridge will not be ended by a blow to the chin by someone who has taken one drink too many. I commend this to the House. What about the financial side? I'm not talking about drug traffickers here. I'm talking about those who are commercially prepared to grow a healthy, healing herb. We're talking about tourism of people coming to our state to experience our benefits. Look at what happens in Amsterdam, for example. Can we not make a feature of that? What about wellness villages where people's bodies and minds are being cared for by the use of appropriate psychological and physical interventions, including that of cannabis? What about our vets who are returning broken in body and mind, who are denied access to this and other healthy healing herbs for their mental wellness, and we allow them to die a sad, lonely, poor death because they are unable to function in society? Can we reverse that? Most certainly we can. And it is our duty, is it not, to look after those who are weakest in society. Denying society access to cannabis is tantamount to causing sizable subsections of our community to suffer in poverty and distress, physical and mental. I would beg of you to reconsider the opinions that are favoured by the majority. Reconsider with an open mind what could be done to enhance the wellness of the people who are looking to us for some measure of support and a guidance that will lead them into better wellness, physical and mental and social and financial. This is but one step, and we are able to make a sizable change to the wellness of our population. It is incumbent upon us to take this seriously, to look closer, to examine the details, and to take the appropriate measures. Members, I commend this to your attention.
When you look at the damage that alcohol does in our society, people requiring liver transplants, people families needing support. Alcohol is addictive versus cannabis, which is not addictive. People will use alcohol to excess. Alcohol can cause more behavioural issues than what you find with people who are using cannabis. One of the big issues with alcohol that you're looking at is that people become violent. And this has certainly been noticed, in particular in relation to domestic violence throughout COVID and people being in lockdown. So if you think alcohol is okay with the very obvious negative consequences this has on people, and then you say cannabis is not, it is simply not logical. People don't die from cannabis overdose. People don't end up needing a liver transplant because of cannabis. People mostly on cannabis do not get violent either. You know, if I'd have the option in dealing with people who are intoxicated with alcohol, or people who are using meth, for instance, versus people who've just had a joint, I would much prefer to deal with those people who are under the influence of cannabis versus any of the other drugs out there. I do think too that a lot of people who are using any of the other intoxicants that are available to them are, and using them to a degree of excess that is affecting their life in a negative way, those people are traumatised. I don't think they need to be further traumatised by getting a criminal record or by being busted by the police for things like that, or going to jail. Those people need help. They need help for their mental health issues. They need help to deal with their trauma. And I don't think that criminalising some of those behaviours, like using cannabis, is particularly useful for that group. Thank you.
Minister for Mental Health.
Thank you, President. It's my pleasure to rise on behalf of the Government this morning to speak on this motion, and I will at the outset congratulate the Honourable Sophia Moermond for bringing forward her first non-government business to this place, and I also congratulate the Honourable Brian Walker in relation to his bill that he read into this place too this morning. I do appreciate the passion that you both have in relation to the issue that got you elected to the Parliament, so congratulations. That's the good stuff over. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position this morning to indicate that the government is supporting your motion.